and welcome to another Wolftime gaming video. Today we're continuing with our Blood Bowl theme and we're going to be painting Varag Ghoul Chewer, who plays for he's the star player for the Orc team, the Black Orc team. He's an absolutely fantastic looking sculpt. I love how mean he looks with those big horns coming out the bottom of his sort of jaw piece. The actual ghoul on his shoulders a really nice touch as well. But before we get started on the painting, as usual, let's get that kettle on. Okay, so the first thing I've done is give him a really good base coat, and I've used Games Workshop's Grey Sear for that. Now as you can see, I've already stuck the basic material down, which is just a really fine sand. I've just used PVA glue, dipped it into the sand and let it dry, and then given it all a really good spray, probably the day after, just to make sure the PVA glue had all dried nicely, and then we can actually get started on the colours. Now the orc skin, I'm using a bit of a blend of two different colours for this one. I'm actually using about a 50-50 mix of Death World Forest, which is a base coat, and about 50% of Flash Gits Yellow, and this gives it a really bright green sort of a feel. Now this isn't the what we're going to finish with, because I'm going to pop a little bit of shade on there, but essentially you go around this whole thing. All I've done is get a pot of Death World Forest and stick about half a pot of the Flash Gits Yellow in there, and basically what that does is give you a pot of orc skin paint essentially, so you can use that for like loads and loads of different things, but essentially just go over the whole of the miniature and paint all the skin, and then you can move on to the next bit, which you can see I've already started here. I've just grabbed a pot of a contrast paint called Black Templar. It's a really great contrast paint. If you've watched any of my other videos, you'll know it's sort of my go-to now for any sort of black painting, really, mainly for the fact that you don't need to, or you don't always need to highlight, which I think is great because you can just stick it on and away you go, and then you just go over the whole miniature. I've essentially covered all of the areas of armour essentially with the black, apart from the main chest plate, because I wanted to go with a nice bright yellow for that. Once that black's all dry, I'm moving on to the next part now, which is actually shading the skin. I've grabbed a pot of Beltane green, which is a really bright sort of a green colour, and it does change the colour of the skin quite a lot, as you can see. However, it drops into the recesses really nicely and gives you kind of like a dark greeny, almost fluorescent green sort of shaded areas, and I think it looks really good. But to bring some of the colour back up, I've gone back to my pot now of mix of 50-50 of Death World Forest and the Flash Gits Yellow, and basically picking out all the raised details, all those raised areas across the mini, specifically concentrating around the muscle areas. As you can see on the arm, it's a perfect example to show you there, where you've got the bulging muscle, and just go over the top of that with that original paint. And what it does then is leaves you with a few different shades of skin, which looks a little bit more realistic, and you can see with the final miniature how good it looks. Next, we're moving on to the next contrast paint, and as I mentioned earlier, the chest plate I really wanted to be this bright yellow sort of colour, so I've gone with contrast Eandon yellow. It's a really nice bright yellow colour, works absolutely fantastically. I know contrast paints are really designed to go onto sort of more detailed areas, but it works great on this base plate. It's only a small area. I've also picked out his plume as well, just on the top of his head. Now, because I wanted to add a few extra details just on the actual armour pieces, I've grabbed another pot of yellow, which is Avalan Sunset, just to paint in a couple of triangles, essentially, just to add a little bit more interest to the armour plates, rather than just having them that plain black, or if you wanted to add a little bit of silver to them, that adds a little bit of interest. But I wanted something bright on there essentially, so I've gone with that, just so we've got something a little bit different. We're then going to paint up the trousers and all the cloth areas, and I'm using another contrast paint called Contrast Wildwood. Again, if you see my videos, this is kind of my go-to for all brown paints. I think it's an absolutely fantastic brown. It works really well. Again, it gets rid of the need to highlight if you don't want to. You can get your minis on the tabletop really fast. And it's a great colour as well. You can see there how it drops straight into the recesses and what an effect it has already, and you don't have to make that much effort. You just literally have to stick your brush in the pot and put it on the mini and you're done. But essentially I'm going around the whole mini, painting the gloves at the moment, as you can see, pretty much everywhere. You do need to take your time around those skin areas because you don't want to get over the skin, especially after putting the effort in with the shade and then highlighting again. You don't really want to get any on there. If you do, just grab that pot of your 50/50 Death World Forest and Flash Skitch Yellow, or grab a little bit more and mix it, dependent on how you popped it on there. And then you can essentially just touch up the skin if you need to. But I would do try not to get anything on there. As I say, try and use a smaller brush and just take your time around the mini. There's no rush with this. Now, to add a little bit more interest to it, I've grabbed a bit of Mornfang brown, and all I'm doing with the Mornfang brown is going around the mini and picking out all the little straps that essentially would look a little bit different to the rest of the brown, especially around the trousers. I think it works great. His belt is a perfect place to use this Mornfang brown. And you're just putting a little bit in the centre essentially, and what this does is give you more interest, gives you another colour to the mini, and adds a little bit of detail to it that and that's as much as you really need to do, to be honest. With the brown, you don't need to do a lot more. The next thing I'm doing here is I've grabbed a little bit of Xandri dust and I've just dry brushed just the ends of the horns, just on the front of his sort of face piece, and I'm also going around and picking out all his sort of claws as well, because I'm going with the sort of Xandri dust feel for this one, because I want him to be a bit different. And then you can just touch up a little bit heavier on the edge of the horns as well with the Xandri dust. Just so you've got like a blend of the brown into like a tan colour, and it looks really effective. I'm also picking out any of the skulls, so he's got one on the top of his helmet there, with the Xandri dust as well, and then giving it more of a sort of bone feel rather than using the browns and things. Now, because I wanted it to look a little bit fun, I suppose, I've gone with a red paint now, another contrast paint called Blood Angels Red, and I'm using this on these sort of trainers, the trainer areas, because I wanted it to look a little bit fantastical. I wanted it to look like he's actually wearing trainers. The sculpt almost looks like trainers anyway. I think they look absolutely amazing, and I really wanted them to stand out to make it look like he's got all this armor plating, his leathers and stuff, but then he's got some really fancy trainers because he's running around on the actual Blood Bowl pitch. I think it looks really effective. And just to finish that off, there's some of the metal areas around the bottom of the actual shoes, and the front of the shoes, like a toe cap area that looks metal. So I've gone back to the Black Templar to actually paint those, because I missed those earlier. And I think it just touches it up as well. After you've done the contrast paint, the contrast red a little bit does run onto there, so it's a good time to touch that area up. Now, to highlight some of the bone areas, what I'm doing is gone to a Shabti bone, and I'm just touching up the raised areas, all those bones. So you've got a little bit on the ghoul, just to his sort of spine area that's just sticking out the bottom of his torso, and also just the on top of the helmet as well, just picking out those details so they look a little bit brighter. We can add a shade to that in a little while just to finish it off, but first we're going to move on to the metal areas around the miniature, and we're going to be painting some of the areas straight on with lead belcher. Some of the areas we are going to dry brush, so we're picking out he's got like a big claw in his left hand. There's a few little metal areas just on the buckle. He's got a couple of rings around the horns coming off the front of his faceplate there. There's a few bits that I really wanted to shine as metal, So I've gone with the lead belcher, and I'm just picking these out slowly with this fine tip brush, just all around the mini. And then things like the chainmail and stuff like that, just using exactly the same brush, wiping the majority of the paint off, and just slowly wiping the brush across those areas. And essentially what it does is just catch the raised area of it, so it leaves the black in the bottom of the chainmail, so it essentially looks like you're highlighting it more than actually painting it, if that kind of makes sense. Just to add a little bit of detail to the mouth, he has got his jaw open so you can see his tongue. So I've grabbed a little bit of Screamer Pink. Now this is quite difficult. I probably should have done this at the beginning, and I wish I had done, to be honest, because it was really awkward to try and get in there. But all I'm doing is grabbed a bit of Screamer Pink and painting the tongue essentially, so it does stand out rather than just being all completely black inside his mouth. And while I'm in that area, I've decided that this is a good time to actually paint the teeth. So I've grabbed a little bit of Xandra dust that we had out earlier, and all I'm doing is touching just on each of the teeth, or in each of his sort of, he's got quite big teeth at the bottom as well, just putting a little bit of paint on there so it stands out a little bit from the rest of the mouth. You don't need to worry about getting the whole tooth either, because you're shading and things in the miniature and you're not going to see it all, but essentially just picking out what you can see. Now for the eyes, I've gone with similar sort of technique to what I've done in the past if you've been watching my videos, and all I'm doing is grabbing a little bit of black paint. It doesn't matter what black paint you use, and just drawing across where the eye would be. And this is basically the first step in adding the shadow. The second step is to grab a little bit of white paint. Now I'm using Corax white for this, but you can use, again, whatever white paint you like. And all I'm doing is painting a line to the centre of that black area. And that's essentially the eyeball. You can see on the right eye there that it's standing out really well. However, it looks a little bit strange because it's bright white eyeball and there's no iris, but essentially that's what we do in the next step. You can see I'm using the brush there. It's slightly curved on the end of my brush, and what I'm doing is just using the tip of that. So just work with what you've got. Just take your time and you'll be fine. Now to pick out the iris, as I was just talking about, I'm using exactly the same brush again. I've got a little bit of black paint, same black I've used for the actual shaded area of the eye as such, and all I'm doing is touching just to the centre of each of those eyeballs. So what you've then got is the shading area around it with a light area of white in the middle, and then you're splitting that white area essentially. If you look at eyes normally, they're not, you don't see the whole of the iris, you only see white on each side of the eye, and that's how I essentially paint, and I think it works really well. Now to start shading the model, starting with all those silver areas that we painted earlier, and I've grabbed a bit of null oil, and this works really well, especially with the silver paints. It makes it look a little bit more metallic, more like a silver metal, rather than this really bright shine that you get with a lot of silver paint. It sort of dulls it down quite a lot and makes it look really effective. And I'm going around the whole of this area, the silver areas, and I've also covered some of the black as well, just to blend like the yellow and the black in on his face mask and that sort of thing. Now the next thing I'm going to do is use exactly the same technique again, but this time using Agrax Earthshade, and I'm going around the whole of the miniature, picking out all of those areas that have gone with a tan sort of a colour, or the lighter brown Mournfang as well. And what this does is blend in the browns and the tans that we've used with the rest of the miniature. You'll note that without this, the Ushabti bone on the bone areas and the Mournfang do stand out quite a lot, and this works really well to blend it all in nicely. Now the ghoul, I've decided to go with a normal sort of skin colour, so I've grabbed a contrast paint. This time it's contrast Gulliman Flesh, and I'm covering the whole of the ghoul essentially with Gulliman Flesh. I wasn't sure how to paint this, so I left it till last, because I was in two minds about whether to go with sort of a greener shade, but because the model itself, the Varag himself is actually green and green skinned, I didn't want to go with that, so I went with a normal flesh colour in the form of Gulliman Flesh, and it works really well. Because of that, he looks a little bit more like he's only recently maybe died, so I wanted to add a little blood in, and I grabbed a little bit of blood for the Blood God, which is a technical paint from Citadel. It's absolutely fantastic. It's really glossy, so as soon as you stick it on there, it shines up really nicely and looks like fresh blood. So essentially I've concentrated around all those areas where he's been ripped apart, like around the midriff, around the horn that's coming out of his stomach, and there's a few bits on his face as well that I've kind of concentrated on. And that's the majority of the actual miniature finish, but the big thing we need to do is paint the base, and I'm starting with Rhinox hide, and all I'm doing with the Rhinox hide is painting all that sort of material that we put on the base early, and just taking my time with that. To frame the miniature, I'm then using black paint around the base. You can see I've gone straight in with a contrast black paint, so you can see through it straight away, and you do need at least 2 coats for this one if you're going to use a contrast paint for the black. If you don't want to use a contrast paint, use a normal paint. Obviously, you might still need 2 coats, but it can be a little bit easier. For the actual basic material itself, I'm going with a static grass. So the first step is to pop a little bit of PVA glue on there, and instead of using an applicator for the static grass, I'm using tweezers, so it looks a little bit messy. I've done this because I want it to look like the pitch isn't quite kept nicely, and it turns out something like this, which I think looks absolutely amazing. I think the ghoul on his left shoulder pad really stands out from the rest of the model nicely. The yellow really shines well. I think if I'd gone for a complete black, it would have all blended a little too much and it would have looked a little bit boring. So I'm really pleased that I went with that brighter yellow colour. The brown trousers look fantastic when they stand out really nicely from the greens and the blacks on the model. So you've got lots of different colours around the model, which makes it stand out really, really nicely. The green skin is the first time I've used this technique for orc skin. Absolutely fantastic. And as a little bit of a reminder, it's a 50-50 mix between Death World Forest and Flash Kits Yellow, and then you just highlight with that mix again after you've added the Beltane Green as a shade. I think it looks really, really good. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Make sure you do like the video, it really does help. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't before, because we're going to have loads more videos coming your way. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.